listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with the briefing. Most of us renters have no choice but to rely on real estate agents. We trust them to be a kind of impartial, neutral operator standing between us and the landlord. But they're not neutral, not really. Real estate agents are legally obliged to do what's in the best interests of their client, that is the landlord, the person who pays them. Lots of renters, and full disclosure here, myself included, have horror stories about real estate agents acting dishonestly in the best interests of the landlord. Now, renters aren't perfect by any means, but when it comes time to leave a tenancy and importantly distribute the bond, it can feel like the referee, that is the real estate agent, clearly favours one side over the other. So how can we make this system fairer and less stressful for all involved? In part one of our special on the world of rental bonds, we spoke to Leo Patterson-Ross, one of Australia's top renters' rights advocates, about how we could make this system better. In this episode, Leanne Pilkington, president of the Real Estate Institute of Australia, joins us. Leanne, tell us first about the nightmare tenant. What's the worst case scenario for landlords and how common is that?
Thankfully, it's not common. The majority of tenants are pretty good, but there can be a situation where a tenant might, paint a room black, for example, or have animals in the house when they haven't been approved for animals and they've damaged carpets or timber, door frames and that kind of thing. There's all kinds. You'd be surprised what some people will actually do to the property. But thankfully, as I say, it's very unusual.
What does a landlord or a real estate agent do in a scenario like that?
So it's really important that the real estate agent has taken a really detailed ingoing report that the tenant obviously signs off on at the beginning. So everybody's very clear on the state the property was in when they first moved in. A good agent will be looking at the property, doing routine inspections on a quarterly basis. So hopefully, if the agent's doing that, there's not going to be any shocks at the end of the tenancy, right? Because they're going to know that the tenant's been looking after the property well throughout the tenancy. The majority of landlords do have insurance that can cover them in specific instances, but every insurance policy obviously is different. So you need to get your advice from your agent about which one is most appropriate. But I would definitely recommend every landlord should have insurance.
According to a publicly available data analysed by the New South Wales Tenants Union, most tenants do get their bond back in full, as you mentioned, and the average amount taken by the landlord if it doesn't get repaid in full is about just under a quarter. Do bonds need to be as big as they are?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because a bond is only 4 weeks' rent. I say only, I know that is a lot of money. But if somebody leaves owing 2 weeks' rent and then needs the property to be cleaned as well, because that's where a lot of discrepancies happen, is people's version of clean is different. They also have a different view on wear and tear. And that can be quite challenging for the agents to negotiate that between the landlord and the tenant because it can be difficult to define what is just normal wear and tear and what is damage. But no, I think at 4 weeks, I think it's still a reasonable amount of money for tenants to be paying as a bond.
What is wear and tear from your perspective? How does that work?
Well, that's a very good question. You would expect there'd be certain wear and tear with carpet, maybe with paint, that kind of thing. It's just not necessarily as crisp. It's not brand new like it might have been 3 or 4 years ago, but it's not holes in carpets and it's not holes in walls or, big black marks down the hallway. So it is one of those difficult conversations quite often between tenants and agents.
Given that agents are paid by landlords, is it actually possible for them to be entirely fair mediators between tenants and landlords?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I think the majority of real estate agents are quite fair. They don't want to be taking money out of bonds unless they have to, unless it's justified. It's a really difficult conversation to have with a tenant. For example, if I came and had a look at your your kitchen and said, oh, I'm sorry, this isn't clean to my standards. That's not a conversation that you ever want to have, right? So you want to avoid that conflict if you can. I think that the majority of property managers are very fair by nature. That's who they are as people. And somebody has to be the adjudicator. And if the tenant doesn't agree with the agent, obviously they can then go to tribunal and have a member decide. So it's not like the real estate agent is the final decision maker.
Mm. If you ask any renter, really, they might tell you of some abuse of power involving a real estate agent or a landlord. When it comes to bonds, it could be asserting that a rental was definitely professionally cleaned when clearly it wasn't at the start of the tenancy, or that there's some blatant, egregious difference between what's actually the condition of the property and what the real estate agent says it is at the start. What can a tenant actually do in that scenario when they're just starting to go into a rental? They want a good relationship with the real estate agent and the landlord, and they don't have any other options.
Yeah, it's difficult. I certainly accept that. So a tenant needs to make sure that they agree with the ingoing report. They have to sign off on that, that the agent does the report. The tenant has to sign off on it. So I would definitely be going through that with a fine-tooth comb if I was the tenant, and raising any concerns immediately. I would also, most agents take photos of the condition of the property. So as a tenant, if there's something in particular that you're concerned about, for example, a worn patch in the carpet, or some kind of damage that you're concerned about, take photos of it, because your phone will timestamp them or date stamp them, so you can prove that that was already there when you moved into the property. And if the agent tells you it was definitely cleaned, or the carpet was professionally cleaned, or whatever it is, ask them for a copy of the receipt so that you know that it was done.
Do you accept that there is a major power imbalance between tenants and landlords and real estate agents, in the sense that if a tenant believes that they should get their full bond back and the landlord disagrees, and they disagree vehemently, then they would have to go to a tribunal that may take a year or more to get their bond back, and they need their bond to literally get their next house?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging conversation. I don't think it usually takes a year, but I certainly concede it can take too long when it's that amount of money and you do need it for your next property. Whilst 60% of tenants get their full bond back, 40% don't. And so when the numbers are still that high, I think you've got to accept that there is a need for the bond. And there's no easy answers for this one.
Could part of the reason that the number is that high be that tenants just won't fight it at the end because it's going to take that long, because they need to move on with their lives, and also they need a good reference from the landlord and the real estate agent?
Possibly. Most agents are fair. I would say that most tenants, I would think, would fight for the money, as they should. If they genuinely don't believe that the money is owed, they should absolutely go to tribunal for it.
What makes a good landlord, in your opinion?
A good landlord is one that is prepared to get routine maintenance done on a regular basis. A good landlord is one that makes sure that the house is in great condition when a tenant arrives. A good landlord looks after their tenant and respects their tenant's rights to their property, so doesn't turn up unannounced to, fix something in the backyard. So I think it's just a respectful relationship on both sides.
Leanne Pilkington there. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. We'd love it if you could share this app with someone you think might enjoy it. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow from 6 a.m. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you soon.